Perhaps just as a departure from all the equipment stuff, I'd just be interested to slightly pick your brains in terms of perhaps your approach and advice to people pursuing classical saxophone playing as a pursuit versus jazz, because we deal, as I said earlier, we deal with so many jazzers, and we're essentially jazzers, a very loose term, here ourselves. And there's such a different sound, and I just feel technical approach and all the rest of it. How would you define those differences in approach between the two styles?
It's a great question, and it's something that we're faced with more and more now as both professions have been advancing. It's become increasingly hard for players to keep up with all of the different styles, because now you have gradations within those styles. You have smooth jazz versus serious jazz. I don't know what they call it.
Or straight ahead,
straight
like
yeah. And then you have people that are married to the swing era. They love that sound.
Yeah.
Where there's actually a little bit
it.
more. There's actually much more crossover with classical sound of the time. You could point to someone like Johnny Hodges. There are moments where Johnny Hodges sounds like classical players of the 40s, right? So there was much more of an overlap at times. I mean, I think most of us would love to have Paul Desmond sound.
Yeah.
So, so for anything, right?
And that would work perfectly for classical playing.
Well, exactly.
It's a lovely, light, lazy sound.
Smooth, in tune, centered.
Yeah.
But we've now reached a point where specialization is just is pulling the worlds apart. When we look at the rise of Michael Brecker, and we look at modern players like Chris Potter. A lot of us are probably saying that it's really hard to be Chris Potter and Claude DeLong in the same player.
Yeah.
So I think with what's happening in the modern classical side, where we've seen a rise of specialists there, particularly at the conservatory level, university level, college level, is we're seeing many more manuals, many more methods, many more influences. There's a single stream of thought that's coming from every country.
Right.
The saxophone teacher is being called on to be a generalist. He or she might be teaching all the saxophonists, and they're in charge of teaching any classical and any jazz to them all together. And maybe they never took either side to a really high specialist level. And I think that's a challenge. So we are putting that on young teachers, particularly, to go out into the field and address the needs of a student that says, I want to play classical well, and I love these players, and I want to sound like these players. And then I want to play jazz really well, and I want to sound like these players. And then we're putting a teacher in a position to say, that's really hard.
How do you handle that? And what, for example, pulling it back to the gear again, what gear advice do you give those players? Because if I was going to play a classical saxophone sonata, I'm not going to be doing it on an Otto-Link a tenor mouthpiece.
So that's the thing. That's the same thing. We've separated in terms of equipment.
We have, and it is not. To me, it doesn't seem natural to say just change mouthpieces, because it's all about trying to be happy and at one with your setup, and you don't want to be messing with that. So
well, and I would say this mouthpiece is I mean,
full circle. We're addressing that in a sense,
but unabashedly,
this
mouthpiece is tailored to a very specific strain of teaching in the United States that came from my grand teacher, Larry Teal.
Sure.
Larry Teal was very known for teaching a very specific style of an embouchure that was meant to allow the reed to vibrate more freely than some of the clarinet players who were playing saxophone, who were coming to the embouchure from a much more tight and much more hard lip, very flat lip, very strong bite, and in some ways a flat look.
Right.
And Larry Teal was all about corners in and down, flat chin, and opening your teeth as far as you can before you lose vibration off that reed.
Right.
So in doing so, you free up the reed to vibrate.
Right.
Now it allows you to play a softer reed, and that could lead to other problems because Larry Teal also wasn't playing all the most cutting edge altissimo laden pieces.
Yeah.
So as the styles evolved, I found I needed to evolve too. And even past my own teacher, Don Cinta, who was very responsible for commissioning new pieces that challenged the range and the dynamics and all that. I'm sure I'll talk about that tonight.
Right.
So this mouthpiece was an answer to the qualities of sound that I believe Larry Teal wanted with the modern demands of our literature. Frankly, when we get into orchestral situations and solo scenarios with orchestras, you have to have impeccable intonation. Your entire career can be defined by your level of intonation. If you may not be asked back for a gig if it's not perfectly in tune. Because the principal clarinet or the principal flute or someone in that wind section is going to say, we don't want that person again. So I'm very passionate about positioning my students, positioning them well so that when they're ready, they make such a difference, and they get asked again. They get asked back. You may get that one shot, but when you're asked back, you know you did well. And I think that's a lot of what the mouthpiece is about.
Yeah, because there's a lot more, just that situation you described there, there's a lot more pressure on the saxophonist kind of succeeding within the wind section, because that's what the wind section do all the time. It's their full-time job. They play in the orchestra. And I mean, I know from my past experience as an oboist, you don't just get into an orchestra like that. It's the trials, they last for years and what have you. As a saxophone player, it's those limited opportunities, I guess, and you want to make that impression immediately when you sit in the orchestra.
You get one shot to make a great impression. You get one moment. The first sound you make, the first sound you make will either please the maestro or the maestra or not, you know. And then if you don't please them, you're having to make up ground. You got to sound better the next time. And so I'm not saying the mouthpiece is the answer for all of those issues.
You've got to absolutely get all these little details absolutely right, so you can only think about yourself on that day, so that you've got to get your reed right. If the mouthpiece is there, then it's one less thing to think about, I suppose.
Absolutely.